Welcome back to the School Transportation Nation podcast. I'm Tony Corbin, the publisher of School Transportation News. This episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software. Our tech tip is brought to you by Zonar, and you'll be hearing a special message from our friends at First Transportation Solutions, driven by First Student.
Hello, everyone. I'm Taylor Hannon, Associate Editor at School Transportation News. I am back again for my second week in a row, filling in for Ryan Gray. Later on, I'll be talking with TJ Crockett, the Director of Transportation Services for Salem-Keizer Public Schools in Oregon. Stay tuned to hear him talk about his unconventional school startup. It's been an interesting year for him, to say the least. It was funny, Tony. I have to tell this story. I was talking to TJ earlier this month for an online article, and he said something, and I think we need to figure out how to coin it because it's going to get big. Okay, TJ succeeded Michael Shields, who retired at the end of July, and I was joking around with him, and I was like, wow, TJ, this is certainly not the school startup you were probably expecting. And he said, isn't that the theme of 2020? So 2020, not what you're expecting.
Yeah, I think that probably rings pretty true for our industry, Taylor. Definitely didn't see it coming out this way. And other things we weren't expecting is industry advocates questioning, why is the CERTS Act being ignored? Our friends at the American Bus Association, United Motor Coach Association, National School Transportation Association, and Passenger Vessel Association have created like a consortium of associations there, and they are pushing to have the CERTS Act pass. They came out with the following statement. The numbers speak for themselves on a level of support the CERTS Act has received in both the chambers of Congress, 59 senators, 263 representatives, 60% bipartisan co-sponsors. We have been begging and pleading with congressional leaders, especially Speaker Pelosi, Leader McConnell, and the White House for more than 7 months to provide our industries a lifeline to save our essential employees, our businesses. These businesses and workers are critical to the nation's transportation system. They serve students, seniors, minorities, and other travelers and commuters, as well as military, and move people out of harm's way during the wildfires and hurricanes. They deserve better. We need Congress to come together and give true relief to all these modes of transportation that serves everyone and keeps the American economy moving during this pandemic. They went on to share a little more in the press release about kind of what stats they have. I think it really rings true though, Taylor. We feel that there are just a lot of hangups with politics right now. We had the debates last week, more and more going on around trying to pass bills and trying to get aid to people at this time.
Yeah, no, definitely, Tony. And last week, the skinny bill did not pass, and the $1.8 trillion stimulus package is the last hope before the election.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but there is some good news. TransFinder isn't waiting for Congress to pass the second round of the CARES Act. They know districts are struggling with busted budgets caused by COVID-19. To help schools, TransFinder released its own CARES Act. CARES stands for Client Aid Relief for Revolutionary Software. TransFinder wants to get its revolutionary Route Finder Plus software in the hands of districts for as little as $4,995 to get started. TransFinder CEO Antonio Civitella said he sees the CARES Act as TransFinder's investment in the heroic effort schools are undertaking during these challenging times. Tony said, because TransFinder cares, it must act. We are looking forward to having Tony Civitella on next week's podcast to discuss what TransFinder is doing with the CARES Act. To learn more, email getplus@transfinder.com. So, Taylor, we've been getting lots of articles from the media outlets out there. We had our schools contributing to the spread of COVID-19. I guess the big question is, are they?
That is the big question. And there's been several articles coming out that say, maybe they're not. I did some digging on this topic of reopening schools, and I wanted to share some information that kind of struck my attention. The Wall Street Journal put out an article as well as a podcast on the topic, and the education reporter for WSJ, Leslie Brody, sat in on the discussion. She said districts are rethinking distance learning, which is what we've been, seeing as well. And positive COVID-19 cases, while they are trending upwards, big school districts are now bringing kids back into the classroom, and a lot of cases actually haven't been recorded. She discussed that many school districts are requiring the face mask, smaller class sizes for easier quarantine practices, extra cleaning protocols, social distancing, those plexiglass barriers in some places, maybe the lunchroom, as well as increasing ventilation, which looks like it's helping. The CDC reported that school districts using these measures have a significantly lower risk of infection. Leslie Brody also discussed some lessons learned that she's heard during her reporting. Young children don't have as big of a problem keeping the masks on. That was one of the main concerns about reopening schools. She also said schools are expecting closures over the winter months, so as people spend more time indoors. But right now, schools are just trying to get as much in-person education as they can, have staff and teachers interact so that when they do go virtual, if they do go virtual, they have a little bit of a connection there. A resource was created by Emily Oster. She's an American economist, a best-selling author, as well as a professor at Brown University. And she created the National COVID-19 School Responses Dashboard. Essentially, districts can voluntarily give data on COVID-19 infections and their mitigation strategies. And the information is finding that there are 1.5 student infections among 1,000 students for districts with in-person classes, and 2.5 infections among 1,000 employees. But the WSJ podcast I was listening to said just because a student has COVID-19 does not mean they picked it up in school.
So speaking of COVID-19 cases, we had gotten an article about Escambia schools, and the Florida Department of Health had reported very different numbers. You want to give our listeners a little insight on what was going on there?
Yeah, so Escambia School District in Florida reported 17 positive cases as of October 16th, and that's 11 students and 6 staff members, while the Florida Department of Health reported 5 positive cases at the school. So there's a little bit of discrepancy there, which is kind of what we're seeing nationwide, right? Like some school districts opening, some not, some having a lot of cases, some not. It's just kind of this push and pull.
Yeah, I mean, New York Times came out and said, New York is open. Schools are back, right? All school levels, they're back. It's the first major metropolitan big city to send everybody back was New York. And, at the start of this thing, they're kind of the epicenter of all the activity when the COVID-19 pandemic kind of broke out. And here they are, first to reopen in a big way in a major metropolitan. And we've got Boston and Atlanta announcing that they are actually closing schools after reopening. So it feel like it's kind of this hokey pokey, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, shake it all about. I think it's kind of crazy out there. We're doing our best with the information that we have, but it's a real challenge for transportation to try to turn on a dime when things are opening and then closing. And then when will they reopen is the big question, right? Are they going to wait till after Thanksgiving? Are they going to wait until the new year? It's very hard to plan when the target's moving so rapidly.
No, I totally agree, Tony. And Atlanta Public Schools in Georgia just did the same thing. They're postponing reopening plans for in-person education until January 2021. So they're kind of taking a step back and saying, hey, let's get our numbers under control first before we open.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see if that has ripple effects across the state for other school districts that see those major metropolitan areas kind of making those determinations. Does that impact more local decisions, right? Like this is something you hit on last week. And again, I think it only resonates true. Our friend Tim Ammon brought it up originally in the documentation they had for the recommendations for everybody to safely reopen. It's, it comes back to that saying people have local problems. They need to have local solutions, right? So I think this only rings true is what will people do? How will they respond based on what these big cities are doing?
Mm-hmm. Plus, to complicate reopening matters even more, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention came up with some new changes. And previously, a close contact was defined as someone who was close to an infected person for 15 minutes continuously. However, now it defines a close contact as someone who was within 6 feet of someone infected with COVID-19 for a total of 15 minutes over the course of 24 hours. What? Okay, so essentially that means if a student was in contact with another student who had tested positive, let's say they were in contact 3 times with the student throughout the day, for 5 or so minutes, that student would need to quarantine for those 14 days, according to the new CDC guidelines. To me, this sounds like a nightmare for contact tracing.
Yeah, Taylor, I think, there just seems to be uncertainty, and the political debate last week, I watched it. Did you?
I did.
All right. Yeah. So obviously, President Trump and former Vice President Biden faced off in the last debate. Schools kind of led off the conversation, and, there are 63 million viewers of the debate. I think a lot of parents, a lot of people wondering, are my kids going to be able to go back to school to restart? In California, we're kind of a bubble. Right? Like, I feel like we're in this kind of lockdown mode where a lot of other places, they're frankly not in this lockdown mode. So they're just living their best life. So it just is an interesting kind of dynamic where the candidates are facing off and talking about what their thoughts are on schools reopening. What was your big takeaway, Taylor, from the schools reopening discussion?
Well, it was definitely that President Donald Trump has been very vocal. He wants schools to reopen, while former Vice President Joe Biden stressed that schools need more resources in order to reopen safely. But what I'm seeing is that regardless, schools nationwide are starting to open, and technology company Burbio, they have a K-12 school reopening tracker on its website. And it's indicating that roughly 30 million children are back in person, at least part-time. And there's this shift in the percentage of school districts now open for in-person education compared to the start of the school year in August.
Yeah, another big topic, Taylor, was kind of the environmental discussion. That came up as a big one as well that stood out to me. And both candidates kind of made their thoughts felt, where Mr. Trump was much more in favor of current standards of environmental safety, health, well-being, where former Vice President Biden, he was very pro alternative energy and renewables, even came out saying that, he would transition away from big oil. So that's a big one. And I think, everybody's going to be keenly watching the outcome of this election to see which way things go. I feel like in school transportation, alternative energy vehicles has ticked up quite a bit, right? We've seen a lot more momentum and acquisition. Obviously, the VW Mitigation Trust has helped provide a funding mechanism. And the big question in my mind is, how do you keep that funding going once that money dries up? And it might be that these new initiatives that the presidential candidates are proposing might really inject some much needed funding to acquire this equipment.
Yeah, Tony, I would agree. It was definitely a good debate. I would say better than the first one. I think more information got across to the listeners, and I'm curious to see what the election holds and what the future of America holds.
Yeah, though there's still a lot of uncertainty, Taylor, and our friends at Zonar get that. They're a leader in smart fleet management, and they provide a timely tech tip every week for us, and we're really glad to have them. And right now, schedules are a nightmare for just about everyone. Scary times call for clear communication. Parents can use Zonar's MyView to track the school bus and its ETA. You can use its back-end portal to communicate day of changes, delays, and breakdowns. That way, parents know what's coming and when. Fewer things for everyone to worry about. Learn more at zonarsystems.com/myview. That's zonarsystems.com/myview.
So I hope everyone had a great school bus safety week. The theme was red lights mean stop, and driver training was at the top of the list of celebrations. We asked you to share with us what you were doing to celebrate, and I want to thank everyone who sent us pictures and information or tagged us on social media. I greatly enjoyed looking at everything and seeing what people are doing. To tune into that discussion, go to stnonline.com/tag/SBS to see articles on that, and also check out our Facebook page at STN Mag. But there was a trend this year, Tony. I saw a lot of videos compared to, photos or descriptions, and it encompassed what districts were doing. And these were either training videos, or I even saw some song parodies. And it's so great to see districts getting so creative. As I said last week, it seems like districts are utilizing the internet more and kind of putting together more interesting material for students to watch. For instance, Shelby Eastern Schools in Indiana tagged us in 2 videos last week that were created in response to School Bus Safety Week. The first one talks about school bus safety and rules around the danger zone, while the second one talked about emergency evacuations. There was also an article on our website at stnonline.com on proactive response training for school bus drivers. And just to kind of give everyone a little flavor of what this is about, Katrina Morris, the transportation director for West Shore Education Service District in Michigan, worked with the Mason County Sheriff's Office to develop this training. And it's a training that helps prepare school bus drivers for the worst case scenarios. So this could consist of an active shooter situation on the school bus. The state of Michigan actually awarded $810,000 worth of grant money, so all school bus drivers and transportation directors can receive this proactive response training. And there's a teaser video on our website that's posted along with the article, and just watching it gave me the chills. It's super stressful, and to be put in that situation is, as a bus driver, not knowing what to do, it would be terrifying. And the point of the training is that school bus drivers shouldn't react the same in every situation, and that they need to be prepared for those worst case scenarios. So check out our website at stnonline.com/news or our Facebook page at stnmag to watch these and stay tuned in to the discussion. Also, don't go anywhere because we've got a couple great guests coming up.
But before we get there, Taylor, I want to remind everybody about TSD Virtual coming up 9th through the 11th of November. You can go to the tsdconference.com website. We got a star-studded cast of experts that were brought in. We got Temple Grandin, our featured keynote, talking about everything having to do with special needs, autism. Transporting students with disabilities and special needs is our focus, specializing in everything that you're facing, all the challenges, all the nuances. Everyone's getting together to share amongst peers. It's going to be a really great event. Again, we're bringing that audience together kind of in replacement of our TSD conference that was supposed to be in March of 2020. So a long time coming. Here we are, but definitely want to encourage you to sign up. You don't have to fly anywhere. You don't have to book a hotel. You can just sign up. It's $199. We'd love to have you join us. You can go again, tsdconference.com to learn more. Want to welcome a friend of mine, Mr. Ben Shandel, the North American Business Development Manager for First Transportation Solutions, FTS for short. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Tony, thank you. First, let me just start off by saying a big thank you to you and the STN family for inviting me on the show. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to sit down with you. Secondly, just want to say, what a big fan I am of the podcast, getting to tune in every week to hear the industry experts shed light on how they combat our current climate, as well as hearing firsthand accounts of those transportation directors you have on a weekly basis and how they're getting kids to and from school safely has really been very insightful.
Awesome, man. Well, make sure and leave us a 5-star review too. We love those. And we've talked a lot about different trends and things going on out there. And the topic of school startup has been a big one you and I have been discussing. Is there any sage advice you can provide districts that are planning for kind of a cost-effective return to school that are facing really potential upcoming budget cuts or uncertainty?
No, Tony, I appreciate that. That's a great question to ask. And in fact, I was listening to your team last week, STN's own Taylor Hannon, talk about her trip to Wyoming and the different restrictions out there versus LA County. And she hit on a couple important points that each district faces their own distinct set of challenges, whether it's remote learning, various hybrid schedules, alternate schedules, or any combination thereof. And school transportation has been placed in this kind of a mandatory reactive mode that we're positioned in. And in order to combat those looming budget reductions, it's essential to begin to be as proactive as possible. So, when you think about running as efficient as possible, there are a few things that you can quickly scan as potential cost-saving opportunities. There's things like asking yourself, is your fleet the right size? Do you have the proper spare ratio? Do you have too many spares? What are your maintenance costs? Are your buses on the right preventative maintenance program in order to ensure your costs are controlled correctly? What is your process in ordering parts? Do you have too many parts? These are the type of things that are really controllable costs drivers that transportation directors can perform a quick pulse check on. They can recalibrate quickly to ensure that they're maximizing their efficiencies to the best of their ability. And then, after those things are taken care of, I would look at the routing related efficiencies that you might be able to gain. So when we talk about routing related efficiencies, we always say one route cut usually equates to a $40,000 or $50,000 in savings. So there's a few things that I was ensure that I was doing from a routing standpoint. The first one is, let's make sure you have a good quality routing system. And if you don't, you need to invest now, because that's essential in order to move forward. We all know that local knowledge is so important, but we want to put that knowledge into the right system. So that old map on the wall with the string and the pin theory translated on the Excel file that many districts that we engage with still are using, it's nowhere near as effective as getting it into the right routing system application for you. And a reduction of just one of those routes will pay your investment several times over as you get into those right routing systems. And that'll allow you to have the ability to model out different COVID scenarios too, as we go forward and things are constantly evolving and changing. Number two, you want to make sure your routing system is accurate and up to date. When we partner with districts, we find that their system is either underutilized or improperly used. So, things like if you have GPS data for your buses, make sure you're syncing it to your routing system and using it properly. Number three would be proactively seek efficiencies in your existing route plans. All the leading routing systems, they all have these run and route optimization tools, and these tools will point you in the right direction in finding potential route reductions. So you want to be sure to look at those type of things and see if there's any potential route consolidations you can identify. Are you routing eligible riders versus actual riderships? Are we identifying those actual riders getting on the bus on a daily basis? If we're not, we might even be overrouting. The other thing that I would consider, and I know this is really difficult for a lot of school districts to think about, is considering those bell time changes. I know California is having to go through that process right now. And, to be honest, a perfectly balanced 3-tier scheme, it requires about 50% fewer buses than a perfectly balanced 2-tier scheme. So, those are obviously huge cost savings. And although that is the most impactful option a district can make to manage transportation costs, it's also the most complex and difficult to implement. And then, Tony, lastly, I'd say consider changes to services. You can think about things such as extending walk zones to reduce eligible riders, or reduce the number of stops, or reducing enrollment segments altogether. And I think following those guidelines and thinking about those in a strategic way will really allow you to reflect and think about how you're most efficient in thinking about your costs in a diligent manner.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, you talked about some really big items there, right? And that might be kind of stressful for a transportation director or their team to try to tackle all that. And they kind of need a base of knowledge to work from to get that done. And I know First Transportation Solutions offers consulting solutions to help aid directors and school districts to be able to accomplish some of those things that you mentioned. Can you talk a little bit about what is that next step if someone wanted to get help to kind of address some of those things that you just mentioned?
Yeah, our team is, they're considered the world's foremost routing experts. We have 35 routing experts on staff. They serve 1,100 school districts, and they're responsible for routing 30,000 routes on a daily basis. And when I talk about the biggest advantage our routing team has over local districts, it's that's all our routing team does. Strictly 24/7, 365. We're focused on routing, how to get better on routing. And when you think about the school districts and what those routers are confronted with, they have so many different directions that they're getting pulled in other various responsibilities. And so sometimes those routing activities get thrown into the back burner. Before I came on with you, I was actually talking with two different districts. The first one, we partnered with had 10,200 students, and they didn't have a routing system implemented for day-to-day use. And they really tasked us with implementing a new system, building out all the routes, and training the routers to use that new system. In the second district that I was talking to just before we got on, they were talking about things that we were talking about here today, is how can we become more efficient? And one of the things they told me is, hey, we have opportunities for efficiencies here, but we just don't have the time or resources available to find those efficiencies. And that's where our team comes in. We analyze your routes and provide those most efficient route structures for your district to use moving forward. And I'd say, all these savings we talked about, Tony, they're real, and they require the right tools, expertise, and time to properly execute them. And our team at FTS has that extensive experience and can successfully leverage all of those opportunities and more. So we can evaluate your current situation, develop and recommend approach to getting more out of your transportation spending through more effective routing.
Very good. If somebody wants to get in contact with you, what do you got?
Just call me directly, 513-713-5596, and I'll be looking forward to your call.
Perfect. Well, hey, Ben, thanks for jumping on the podcast. Really appreciate your sage advice there. Make sure and check out First Transportation Solutions, everybody. They're driven by First Student. Next up, Taylor Hannon speaks with TJ Crockett from Salem-Keizer Public School District in Oregon.
All right, so I'm here with TJ Crockett. He's the Transportation Director for Salem-Keizer Public Schools in Oregon, and he took over for the retired Michael Shields on July 1. Michael was a previous guest of the School Transportation Nation podcast, so if you want to hear from him, check out episode 13. But how are you today, TJ?
I'm doing outstanding. You?
Not too bad. It's cooled down here a little bit in California. How's the weather up there in Oregon?
Rains are expected for the weekend, so just about normal.
Those rains. Perfect. So can you introduce yourself a little bit? What did you do before coming to Salem-Keizer?
Before I joined Salem, I was the transportation supervisor of Reynolds School District, which is in the Portland area of Oregon. And before that, I spent some time with the Oregon Department of Education in regulatory practice over school buses, spent about 8 years there. For me, personal fun fact, this was a bit like a homecoming because I actually started at Salem-Keizer as a bus driver back in 2003. So it's kind of neat to come back.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I was just telling everyone earlier how this month, when we were talking for an online article, you joked and said this was the year that no one was expecting.
Yeah.
Can you kind of discuss some of the challenges that your school district has had in terms of school startup?
Well, the biggest challenge is not having kids in buildings. Oregon has some really tight metrics right now about when kids can get into the school for some regular learning. And we're pretty far away from those metrics right now. The state's requiring that each county have fewer than 10 cases of COVID per 100,000 people. And the numbers for our local county just came out and they're in the 80s. We also have to have less than a 5% positivity rate, and we're at above 8% right now. So the big challenge is most of our kids are home and learning on the computer through comprehensive distance learning. And so our challenge has been keeping all of our drivers working while that's going on through some various activities.
Mm-hmm. So are you guys transporting any students right now?
So yeah, this week we're transporting about 100 students. So they've started doing limited in-person instruction in the schools. So we're allowed groups of 10 in the building or 10 in cohorts, and up to 250 kids a week can cycle through the building. So there's a lot of restrictions on that. Last week we had about 25 kids. So it's slowly ramping up across our 60 schools in the district. Next week, we're going to start transporting our preschool program. So that'll be 32 routes that we have running, and we'll be transporting almost 500 students next week.
Okay. Wow. So have you guys implemented any COVID-19 protocols on the school bus?
Yeah, we've got quite a few. The Oregon regulations don't let us add anything to the school bus, so we're not doing anything like screens or anything like that. Right now, everyone's required to wear masks on the bus. We're limited to 10 kids on the bus because it's the same cohort restrictions that we have. Our drivers are wearing masks. As we drive, we'll have windows open to help get some airflow through the bus as we go through, trying to keep kids separated on the bus as best we can, given the room. Some buses, the preschools especially, they'll have aides on the bus because they have some additional rules they have to do for the preschool program. But that's kind of it. A number of drivers have mentioned they're excited to see kids this week, those that are getting to transport. So I know more are looking forward to it next week.
That's good. So not a lot of fear then in coming back?
Everybody has a little bit of hesitation. We went through it back in September when we first had the drivers here. And there's kind of an anxiety hurdle you got to get over as folks come back. We've experienced it with staff in other situations. And so the first couple days we'll be a little anxious as we wait to see what happens. But as things start to normalize, you kind of get over that and it smooths out. And so we've had a lot of opportunities to see that kind of anxiety hurdle come and go with a number of our staff. And I think it'll be the same next week when we start transporting the preschoolers. And I think the parents will go through it too, because it's the first time they've let their kids go for a little bit.
Right. The moms are probably going to be like wanting to hold on to their babies as long as possible.
Yeah, they do that anyway. So yeah, during this time, it only makes sense they'd have some feelings.
Okay, so then on top of the pandemic challenges, your first week of school was a little hectic.
Yeah, so over Labor Day, we had some terrible winds come through. And we had some wildfires going in the mountain range, and they usually stay up there, but we had hurricane force winds come through from the east and blow the fires down towards the Willamette Valley, which is kind of the main population area of the state, is in the Willamette Valley. So on our first day of staff presence, which was September 8th, we had just really thick black smoke had rolled here into town. And we had evacuation orders just east of us, as close as 12 miles away from the city of Salem and our district, which impacted a number of staff. Of course, we don't have a lot of staff in the building because we're trying to be physically distanced due to COVID, but it was difficult to work outside too because all the smoke and the low air quality that we had. And during that time, we were trying to get the fleet ready for the service we would start providing later in the month with lunch services. So that was quite the challenge.
And I know we have an article at STN Online about it, but how did your school bus drivers play a role in transporting some military personnel to those fires?
Yeah, so that first week, the fires had gotten really uncontained and spread out. And so the Oregon Forestry Department had tapped the National Guard to help respond and provide some services to them. And they had run out of transportation options. So they asked us if we had some availability to help. Because we weren't transporting kids to and from school, we had that extra capacity that we could respond and help. So the Friday after Labor Day, we got a call and were able to respond, and we transported over the course of those 2 weeks that the fires and the smoke were in town. We transported a little over 1,000 troops to different fires around the state. And it was really rewarding that we were able to do that.
Wow. So how did your school bus drivers react to that?
Well, we put out a volunteer list to see who wanted to do it. We didn't want to ask folks that maybe weren't comfortable getting that close to the fires to respond. And then, of course, having big groups of people on the bus when we're not really full into transportation yet. So we got a number of volunteers, way more volunteers than we had work to do. So we did our best to spread that around, which was great. Our drivers always answer the call when they're asked, and it was just another fine example of that. So each move, we did 7 moves total, and we used between 6 and 9 buses each move. So, and like I said, we went all over the state, so we had a lot of long days getting folks where they needed to go.
You know, it's really amazing the work that school bus drivers do. I know First Student locations in Southern Oregon also help with the fire efforts. They help evacuate community members, some people from nursing homes and assisted living facilities. The school bus drivers really went above and beyond their job descriptions. They help lift people out of their wheelchairs to use the restrooms. And I think it truly illustrates that the school bus is such an essential service.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I know another thing that you guys are doing, TJ, in terms of the school bus being an essential service is meal delivery. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mentioned we were trying to prep the fleet that first week when the fires came in. What we were getting ready for was a meal delivery service. So all of our schools are handing out grab-and-go meals right now. And we identified another 60 sites around the district that are in areas where it's either too far to get to the school or there's a hazard that keeps those kids from getting to the school. So it's all the areas that we normally transport kids. We set up 60 spots there to go out. We have about 50 drivers at our CTEC building that actually package the lunches. So nutrition brings them over from the central kitchen, whatever the meals are that need to be packaged. And our drivers actually go through, prep all the meals, get them in their coolers and stacked and ready for the buses. And our buses come from all 4 of our sites and run through that location into the bus load zone. We load up all the buses. 60 buses get in and out of there in about 45 minutes, fully loaded with food to take out into our community. We give out about 4,000 meals a day off of our buses. It's about a third of all the meals the school is delivering. And earlier this week on the 19th, we kind of hit a big number. We handed out our 100,000th meal from the school buses. And so we were pretty excited about that.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. And a lot of our drivers have said, it's not the same as driving the kids, but they like that chance to interact with the kids. And so many of them find it to be a rewarding opportunity.
Yeah, the U.S. Department of Agriculture extended the waiver at the end of August that schools can continue to serve free meals to all children under 18. So what benefit and impact has that had on students in your community and their access to proper nutrition?
Well, it's tremendous benefit. Without that waiver, we'd have a pretty good barrier because we'd have to make sure that they're enrolled in school. And one of the challenges with the comprehensive distance learning and the online education is how do we keep students engaged and how do we keep them enrolled? On the academic side of our district, we're constantly kind of fighting that and trying to make sure that kids are present. So this opportunity to feed the kids, whether they're able to succeed at that or not, and quite frankly, to be able to help the siblings of the school kids that we have it's just such a big impact, especially after the wildfires. We've had a lot more people experiencing housing displacement since those fires occurred. A lot of those communities are essentially suburbs of Salem, and a lot of homes were lost up there. So they've transitioned into Salem, and it's nice that our district's able to help those families out.
Yeah. So as a new director, are there any items on your kind of purchasing wish list for this year?
Well, the district back in February made an investment package into transportation. And they reaffirmed it last month. Even with COVID going on and all the struggles that we have in that area, the school board reaffirmed a very large $65 million investment package for transportation. And out of that, what we'll be able to do is replace almost 200 school buses and build a new facility that'll actually house most of our buses. So instead of having a main lot and 3 satellites, we'll have 2 big facilities to accommodate all of our buses and training and growth. So those are the big focuses from a purchase standpoint that we're working on right now.
Oh, okay. Wow. And is there a particular fuel you're sticking with for the 195 buses?
Yeah, right now we've got 2 tanks on site, and I mentioned we're a bit small, so we're going to stick with gasoline and diesel buses for now. As we build out the new site over the next 2 to 3 years, we may look at some other options.
Okay. And so how were you able to get the funding for that?
So the district was able to get a full faith and credit bond, which allows us to borrow the money to make these investments and repay over a period of time. And the money hit the bank last week.
Well, that's awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing how the facility looks, and I hope you'll send us pictures throughout the entire process.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really excited about it. We'll want to share.
Good. All right. Well, perfect. Well, I really appreciate you being on here, TJ, and kind of shedding some light. I think the work you guys are doing with the meal delivery and how you helped with those fires is just truly outstanding. And it's really great to write about these stories right now, especially with everything going on. So thank you for all the work your district is doing.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Well, I hope to see you at the TSD virtual conference, TJ. Take care.
Taylor, excellent conversation with our friend TJ. TJ, congrats again, new transportation director. Feel like it's baptized in fire, though, with Oregon fires and all the COVID challenges. It's just a crazy thing for sure. We're so glad to have had you on the podcast. And also Ben from First Transportation Solutions, thanks for jumping on as well. Taylor, you did an awesome job filling in for Ryan the last couple episodes. He'll be back next week. Thanks to everyone for listening. Stream all our previous episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to go to the STN website and check out stnpodcast.com. Subscribe, tell your friends, leave those 5-star reviews. We love those. Again, special thanks to our sponsors, TransFinder, Zonar, and First Transportation Solutions. Visit stnonline.com for your news, analysis on all aspects of student transportation. Remember, you can register online for our interactive special needs training event, TSD Virtual. Get the details, get registered, tsdconference.com. We'll see you next time, School Transportation Nation. We love you.